but we're going to get started because we have a lot of material to get through, and people may have questions about this. So my name is Cindy Gray. I'm the Executive Director of Fargo-Moorhead Metropolitan Council of Governments. And with me today is Michael Maddox, the Project Manager for our 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And a couple of weeks ago when we met with our Executive Committee, and we explained the adoption process for this project. It's been going on for about a year and a half now, or more than a year and a half. And we explained that there's just a lot of material to get through, and we didn't want to burden each one of the local jurisdictions' regular commission and council meetings with the full-fledged presentation on this project. So we asked if they would be interested in having some kind of a brown bag where all these materials were presented, and then we can do an abbreviated presentation, hopefully at each one of the local commission and council meetings when we bring forward the resolution for adoption of this project, which is required before we get it approved by Federal Highway Administration and the North Dakota and Minnesota Departments of Transportation. So with that, I'll just get going before I turn it over to Michael. This is just a little bit of plan background and overview. As I said, this project has been going on for over a year and a half now. But even before that, there were a number of steps that were being taken and a number of efforts that were made to get the data that was needed to move forward with this plan. So in 2015, we did a regional traffic counting program, and you can see the dollar values of each one of these efforts up there along with the effort itself. And then in 2017, we did an origin destination household and employment data purchase, and that was purchased from a big data company. In 2017, we did a long-range data development study that many of you participated in, and there was a demographer involved in that project that worked on long-range population and household projections and job projections for our metropolitan area. And in 2018, we did our travel demand model update at the same time as we began the working with a consultant for the actual development of the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So all in all, this is the required preparation of this plan every 5 years is a large investment for us, but it gives us lots of opportunities to hear from the public and to try to get the public's best interests into the plan. So a little bit about Metro COG and about our metropolitan area. This outer boundary line that's shown on the map is our metropolitan planning area boundary. So all of that area is part of our study area, so to speak, when we are working on a variety of projects. The plan itself, for the most part, addresses the urbanized area, which is this purplish colored boundary that's closer in. And so our urbanized area is where the majority of our planning efforts go, and where the majority of the use of federal funds is for programming purposes takes place. In 2020, in the Decennial Census, we expect to tip the 200,000 population mark, which will put us at transportation management area status, provided that legislation does not change with a highway bill update. But even in 2018, the population estimates for our metropolitan area are far exceeding the 200,000 mark at about 212,000. From a metro perspective, we're growing over 4,000 people a year. And we currently have 7 member jurisdictions: Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo, Horace, Dilworth, Cass County, and Clay County. And we expect that urbanized boundary that I showed in this map is likely to stay the same as we move forward after the 2020 census. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of outlying rural non-farm development or newly forming metropolitan incorporated areas that we would need to bring in to our urbanized area. This is the cover of our 2040 long-range transportation plan, which was adopted in 2014. And there has been a lot of work completed or underway right now that came out of that plan, or that was identified as priorities in that plan. Just to name a few, we have the 52nd Avenue South capacity improvements, the Cheyenne Street capacity improvements in West Fargo, and the Cheyenne interchange redesign in West Fargo, 25th Street interchange reconfiguration and capacity improvements in Fargo. We have a couple of significant projects in Moorhead with the 20th, 21st Street grade separation and the 8th Street interchange redesign with the DDI at I-94. Main Street reconstruction in Fargo, that's part of it's been completed and part of it's yet to be completed. And you can see the others on there with 64th Avenue South, 19th Avenue North, 32nd Oak Grove pedestrian bridge between Fargo and Moorhead. So a lot of work has been taking place over the last 5 years, and we think that's why this plan is so important. It really sets the stage for where our dollars are going to be invested in the next five to 6 years, so before we update it again. From the standpoint of Metro COG itself, as an agency, we added another staff person in 2018 and filled our staffing. We increased participation in planning efforts around the metropolitan area and also tried to just increase our agency outreach in general. We have caught up on our consolidated planning grant balances. Many of you know that Metro COG had some aging consolidated planning grant funds that we were at risk of losing if we did not put those to good use, and that has been done. And so we're now working on, they're all under contract and all those projects are moving forward. And we are, in general, preparing Metro COG and the metropolitan area for the future in terms of transportation especially. So in terms of regional trends, our growth is significant. Many of you already know these things. We're the fourth fastest growing small city in the US. We've outpaced the 5 fastest growing cities in North Dakota, even with some of the oil development that took place in the western part of the state. And all of that, of course, presents a lot of challenges from a transportation standpoint. But our outward expansion has kind of temporarily slowed or stalled due to the need to get some of the flood protection, the flood projects or flood infrastructure underway. And as a result of that, it seems our density has increased with a lot more infill development and redevelopment, and we see that as a positive because just of the fact that it makes use of infrastructure that already exists. But you can kind of see what the future holds from the projections in terms of household growth and employment growth. We're looking at, in the next 25 to 30 years, 40% increase in households in our metropolitan area with over 36,000 new households projected, and over 56,000 increase in employment. So those are significant numbers, and it's important that we are preparing for that. School enrollment is a significant factor. We have huge growth in school-aged populations, and this drives demand for new school facilities, which often end up getting developed out in the fringe areas of the community, similar to the one that's being developed in Horace at this time. And our overall metro area enrollment in K through 8 is over 25,000. Our high school enrollment is about 11,500. And we're also a center for higher ed with over 27,000 students enrolled in our local colleges and technical schools. So this is also significant both in terms of our growth and our need for transportation services to and from those areas. This is a page from the plan that talks about our journey to work characteristics of our metropolitan area, and I'll get into some of the specifics of it in these slides. Our average commute to work is about 16.7 minutes, which is really awesome for metropolitan areas of our size. You can see that around 25% of workers age 16 and older have a commute time that's only 10 to 14 minutes. And then another just slightly higher percentage has a 15 to 19 minute commute, with many people having a even shorter, and then multiple categories just sort of dwindling down to that hour and a half range on the very outside of that spectrum. And part of the reason that there are some of those longer trips is because we have a large percentage or a large number of people coming from outside the urbanized area or outside the metro area, coming into our urbanized area to work. So we have over 25,000 people who are employed in our metro area who come in from outside. That has implications for North Dakota DOT and Cass County and Clay County in terms of the demand that it places on those rural highways and interstate highways. It is part of the reason why we see several thousand cars a day added to those facilities during peak times coming to and from work. But the largest percentage of our employment is people from right in the metro area at over 99,000 employees. And then we have about 12,000 people who live in our metro area but leave the area to go to jobs outside. And in terms of the means of people getting to work, this is another consideration as part of a metropolitan transportation planning process. The largest percentage of our population drives alone to work. About 82% drives alone. And then you can see about 8.4% carpools, shares a ride with someone, and then we get into these smaller percentages of people who use public transportation, walk, ride a bicycle, a motorcycle, or use a taxi or Uber or some other means to get to work. And then we have, interestingly, we have about 4.1% of people who work at home and aren't part of that commuting picture. This slide was derived from our public engagement efforts that we went through early on in the project, and it shows where the people who responded to our surveys, where they live and where they work. And what we derived from this is that there's just a lot of free flow of where people live and where they work in the community. It's not unusual at all for people to live in North Fargo and commute to South Fargo, and live in Horace and commute to Moorhead and so forth. There's just, we kind of free flow throughout the community. We're a little bit different than, say, Bismarck-Mandan, where the Missouri River seems to be a significant barrier. The red isn't that much of a barrier to us. We just drive from Fargo to Moorhead as if we're just operating within the same community. So that's kind of an unusual characteristic of our community compared to some of our regional counterparts. Our public engagement participation for this process was very significant, and this is due to Michael's effort up front in the project. Before I actually started at Metro COG, he worked with the consultant to set up a very robust public engagement plan. And so we were at the street fair in 2018 and had a lot of public input at that time. We were at multiple community festivals and events throughout the metropolitan area in the summer of 2018, and then had many other efforts over the course of the year in terms of public engagement opportunities on both sides of the river. We had social media and email campaigns. We had our website for the project. And as I mentioned, we had a number of open houses. And again, kind of a more recent effort at the street fair and a couple of other community events this summer as we kind of work towards a draft plan. So one of the things we put together is a video to kind of help explain to the public what
the Fargo-Moorhead Metropolitan Council of Governments, or Metro COG, is the transportation planning organization for communities across the Fargo-Moorhead area, including Cass County in North Dakota and Clay County in Minnesota. One of our primary goals is to help shape our community's vision for the future of transportation in our region. We work together with local communities in collaboration with the North Dakota and Minnesota Departments of Transportation to maintain a continuous, comprehensive, and coordinated transportation planning process that accommodates the variety of ways that people and goods move within and throughout the region. Metro COG carries out planning efforts that relate to how we live, work, travel, and play. Our plans are developed to address regional safety and mobility issues and to provide the types of transportation options our community desires. We strive to make thoughtful decisions on how to invest in our street, highway, transit, bicycle, and pedestrian systems. Get involved now by learning more at fmmetrocog.org and follow us on Facebook. Over the next few months, we'll be updating the long-range transportation plan known as Metro GROW. This plan is updated every 5 years to plan for growth and change in the community and to better reflect public preferences and new and emerging transportation technologies. We study trends and revisit our community's priorities to help identify future transportation investments. This plan will set the vision for our transportation system for the next 20 to 25 years. Residents play an important role in this planning process. This is why we need your help. Your input helps inform and shape our decision-making process. Visit our website to learn more about the ways you can get involved. We're looking forward to planning our transportation future with you.
And speaking of education and outreach and public engagement, before I turn the rest of this presentation over to Michael, I just want to say that today's presentation will be posted on our website and will be distributed to all of our local partners so they can post this on their website. And we're asking, anyone who's interested from the public or the elected officials and planning commissioners to watch this and provide us with final thoughts and questions on this plan. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael to walk you through the more technical aspects of the project.
Thank you, Cindy. As she mentioned, we'll get kind of into the analysis portion of the plan. The plan does include a lot of technical information as well as some of the background information from our area. We are required by federal regulation to include certain elements in our plan. One of those from the FAST Act, Fixing America's Surface Transportation, which was the current transportation authorization bill that was passed by Congress and signed by the President, included performance-based planning and programming mantra and instituted performance measure categories that all of the MPOs in the nation have to report on either a year-to-year or 2 to 4 year basis. PM1, as we call it, is the system safety performance. It measures 5 key areas. There's a couple on the screen here. We are meeting and exceeding all of those performance measures in our area. We have set certain crash targets. We have supported the state targets. We have a choice to either create our own or support the states. We have supported our states, but we put some of the information up here. I would say that 5-year rolling average crash rate is really a good indication of kind of how we contribute to the state's overall safety. As you can see here, we are much below the crash target rates in this area than some of the areas in both Minnesota and North Dakota, mostly because rural areas tend to be rural highways with higher speeds and less visibility, especially when crops, for instance corn, are planted in adjacent fields, tend to be kind of the most unsafe, where most serious injury and fatalities occur. This is a page out of the plan. Here just kind of lists some of the statistics. As you can see, kind of some of the fatalities. That first table there is fatalities in our area, crash severity. The vast majority of crashes in our urban area are property damage only crashes. Very little incapacitating injury or serious injury or fatalities. And then on the last chart is what by mode. We did do an analysis within the transportation plan of where kind of the most traffic incidents occur in our area, so that the 20 highest incident intersections. And I'll go to the map on the next page, it's a little bigger. This map shows where those high crash intersections are. As you can see by the map, there is a high correlation to commercial areas with corridors with lots of access and signalization. That makes a lot of sense. Those are some of the higher volume roadways with more access points, more conflict points. So this tend to be where more crashes happen. However, like I said in the previous slide, a lot of those are property damage only, fortunately. The next planning-based performance measure is what we call PM2, or bridge and highway condition. We are also meeting and exceeding all of the targets that we have set. The first slot, or the first graph there on the left, is the percentage of interstate pavements that are in good condition. One thing to call out there is in the Minnesota side of our region, the interstates are in 100% good condition, which is fairly remarkable. I don't know if anywhere else in the state of Minnesota could probably boast that. On the North Dakota side, a little bit less, but still way above that 75.6% target. And the poor condition, which is at the lower target, we're meeting those as well. As far as non-interstate pavements, we're a little bit less. That's obviously to be expected, but we're still meeting and exceeding all of those targets. And so we just addressed this in our plan. This is a page directly out of the plan, and here's that map kind of close up of where the pavements are. I will call out a couple of areas here. You can see that main avenue here, which is already scheduled for reconstruction. The first segment has been done, but the other, and you'll see this in the bridge data too, is the US 10 intersection or interchange with I-94. There's a bridge condition issue here. We are aware of that, and it's slated to be done within the life of this plan. So moving on to bridges here, you can see the only red dot in our area where bridge condition is an issue is at that interchange in West Fargo. The final performance measure that we're required to look at is system reliability. This is kind of an interesting new way of looking at congestion and how reliable your transportation network is. One of the nuances of that is even if it's congested, it can be reliably congested as long as that congestion occurs on a regular basis. So we are meeting and exceeding all the targets. You can see from that bottom graph there's a lot of red there, and that's not necessarily the fault of reliability on our transportation network. Rather, the data set that the federal government used, which is called the National Performance Measure Research Data Set, or NPMRDS, the acronym, utilized some faulty, unreliable, ironically unreliable data to calculate reliability, and in 2017 they switched their data vendor, so the data became more reliable and we were meeting our targets there. The other part of that target is to look at truck travel time for freight reliability. We know that it's very important, the transportation system, to support the local economy, and this is just a measure of how reliable freight traffic is on our transportation network, both interstate and non-interstate, and it's very reliable in this region. Even reliable congestion is at a significant minimum, as our peak periods last about 15 minutes during morning and the evening peaks. So now we kind of get into real meat and potatoes of the transportation plan. In particular, we do a number of modeling efforts that Cindy keyed in on at the beginning of her portion of the presentation. This map represents level of service that is run through the model given our base year, which is 2015. So the 25-year outlook starts in, or 25 to 30 year outlook starts in 2015. As you can see from the level of service data up here, most of our transportation network operates just fine, even in peak periods. The few areas that do not operate at a high level of service are those places which meet the interstate. You can see here, though, that some of these areas have been addressed through the previous transportation plan. So this is the new DDI, and since the base year of this plan was 2015, these projects hadn't been constructed yet, and so we had to kind of take them out and put what was back in. The Cheyenne Street corridor, which is working on right now, obviously, and then just some area in 45th. This segment here, there's a lot of truck traffic that comes in and out of, there's a truck stop right here. So we kind of clamped an eyeball in that area. But otherwise, the outlook in 2015 is actually fairly good. And we know from the projects that we've been doing in the last 5 years that we've alleviated a lot of the congestion that has been reoccurring in our region, especially in that Cheyenne Street corridor where the queue during the PM peak was all the way back on the interstate. Which it was also a safety concern. So we've gone a long way in a short time to alleviate some of the problems in our area. And as we move forward, you'll see a lot of this plan focuses on efficiency in the transportation system and a balance between mobility and livability. And you'll see that spelled out here in the presentation probably 3 or 4 times in upcoming slides. So within that model, we had to allocate growth to transportation analysis zones, which the model uses to load traffic onto the transportation network. And this is where that data development study allocated a lot of growth in our region. As you can see, there are areas in the southwest area which most of the growth is occurring. However, we did talk to jurisdictions and represented a lot of infill. You can see in the downtown areas there are a lot of those red blocks where a lot more development was going. I'll move on to job growth. Just like the last slide, this is where we allocated those jobs. So that gives you an origin and destination for anticipating future trips. So moving away from 2015 and going to the end year of our plan, 2045, this is what the anticipated congestion or level of service would be on our transportation network given no improvements. So using the current 2015 network, which and any project that we have programmed for construction within a reasonable time period, which we call existing plus committed. I'll call out a couple of projects here. As you can see, level of service has dramatically improved in the Cheyenne corridor where those projects have taken place. Over in Moorhead, just a little bit of congestion, a level of service deficiency in the A Street corridor, but the intersection where it was previously red in 2015, where the interchange has gone away. Main Avenue, this is a great example of a purposeful decision to get away from just focusing on mobility and looking at other characteristics of the corridor. Like I said, that balancing livability with mobility. And we're seeing that occur in other areas too. A lot of you in the room had participated in that corridor study that concluded with the 543 hybrid option. And it was known that particular scenario would add a little bit of congestion, but the stakeholders, downtown residents, and business owners were fine with that congestion. And I think time will tell and I think a little bit of the traffic will distribute on the rest of the network, and I think you'll see that in modeling efforts that I'll show you a little bit down the line in the presentation here. One nuance to this is that they're showing quite a bit of red down here in the southwest region. As you remember from the previous slides, a lot of growth was assumed down in this region. However, because most of the transportation network stops at 52nd Avenue South, there's no transportation network to funnel any of that traffic onto the system. And so a lot of the jobs that we're showing down there, there's no roads to get there using the existing plus committed transportation network. And so there are these very weird routing decisions. And 76th Avenue currently is just a gravel road. Gravel road capacities are extremely low, like 400 cars a day without ripping up the gravel, whereas a paved rural section is like 10,000 cars a day. So a lot of this is showing red just because there is no transportation network, and you'll see that change when we actually place our 2045 scenario. So I know that nobody can read this, but this is a model output of traffic volumes in our area, and I would like to just call out a couple here. The I-94 bridge at the Red River is assumed, or the model has given us a future volume in 2045 about 100,000 cars a day. I'll just let that sink in a little bit. 100,000 cars a day. In talking with the local DOT district, there have been area or times during this summer where traffic has spiked to about 80,000 cars a day. I think we've seen consistently ADTs in the 60 to 70,000 range. And so it's, you know, not beyond the realm of possibility that within 25 years that ADTs will reach the 6-digit level on the bridge there. With the current speed limit and current lane structure there, we believe that this would still operate at a fairly decent level of service. However, we will definitely need to look at that more in depth as we go through the implementation years of this plan. 52nd Avenue South at the Red River, about 20,000 cars a day. Cheyenne Street, 33,000. So as you get to the tri-stack here, traffic has dispersed a little bit, so only about 70,000 cars a day. Yeah, I won't read all of them. So a little bit of trends that came out of the modeling portion of the plan. We've seen, well, back up here, the two sets of data here are one with the existing plus committed scenario, and the next one is our fiscally constrained roadway scenario. And fiscally constrained scenario basically means that we do a financial analysis of all the federal funds that we can expect to receive within the next 25 years, and we program projects based upon that level of spending. And so you can see the trip change, the number of trips is increasing about 40% in the future. Vehicle miles traveled is going up about 65%. Vehicle hours traveled would go up about 66%. Your average trip length would go up 18%. But this is really when to key on average speeds would only decrease about 1%. And the reason I say that that needs to be keyed in on is that we have a lot of capacity in our system currently, and there is a lot of room for efficiency in our transportation system. So we think in the future that we'll still be able to maintain the speeds that are out there and take up some of that capacity that's kind of latent in the system without having to add additional capacity. Again, a mixture of mobility and livability. So getting into some of the functional areas of the plan, I already mentioned there's a financial analysis. We broke down roadway scenario, bikeway bike and pedestrian, transit, and then we lumped, just for the sake of this presentation, I lumped congestion management, intelligent transportation systems, some of the emerging trends. We'll have a little bit of CAV discussion within the plan, and some other strategies as well. So the financial component, this is a page taken directly out of the plan. We broke up, so just I'll step back and make some assumptions here. We are assuming, as Cindy mentioned, that we are going to become a transportation management area with the next census, which, as long as current legislation has that 200,000 threshold. As part of the financial analysis, we had to come up with how much federal funding that we would receive per year. And based upon becoming a TMA, we would receive a direct allocation of federal funds, which means instead of going through the DOT for them choosing projects, we would get direct federal allotment, and that we would choose projects and implement those projects. However, we would not be able to participate in a lot of the funding programs that DOT currently offers, mainly the Regional Roadway System Fund and the Urban Roads Program. So we would eat up about, I think, 30% of those programs. Those programs would decrease about 30% for the rest of the state. I think that it's a fairly good number to aim at. We currently are eligible for more Surface Transportation Block Grant Program funds. However, we don't necessarily actualize that. So this is a rounder out of the average, maybe a little higher than the average that we receive per year, which is pretty good. We applied a 4% inflationary rate in our year of expenditure analysis. So every year we inflated those dollars 4%. And we just wanted to hit home that our consultant, us, and both of the DOTs work very closely to develop these plans, especially in North Dakota where there are no TMAs. This is a new issue for them, and they're not really sure how this is going to affect all of their program. And so we've been working very closely to kind of work out the bugs, as it were. At our public participation this summer, we asked residents to, if they had control of the funds, how would they spend it? And we really wanted to look at all modes of transportation, not just spending it on the highway system. With the FAST Act, the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program became increasingly flexible to use funds on different modes of transportation. Currently, we do flex $1 million project every other year starting in 2017 for transit to purchase buses. And we do that because we know that there is just not enough transit capital money out there to keep up with our current fleet of buses. We would like to continue that program, and the residents in the region did agree with that too. So we set a 6% set aside for transit for capital purchases. However, we did create a set aside for bicycle and pedestrian projects as well. And this is more of a guide than a hard and fast rule. We know that in certain years there might be large projects that might eat up the entire pie, but in the long run, through the life of this plan, we would like to try to average the 5% and 6% spending marks. And then the 89% would be spent on both new roadways and preserving our existing system. We broke up our funding years into 4 categories: short-term, near-term, far mid-term, and long-term. And we did this because we know becoming a TMA, we are going to have to go through a solicitation project to choose what projects get funded every year. And in order to do that, we wanted to have everything very solid in this plan on what our priorities are and what projects are going to cost, so we can line up those funds for spending. As you can see here, the funding level on the Minnesota side for the total 25-year period is $27 million, or about $28 million, which is far below kind of what is needed. But the Minnesota side funds roadways a lot different than the North Dakota side does. There's a lot more state participation in the roadway program, maintenance and expansion, and they do bond quite a bit for the projects, as we've seen with 2021 grade separation. So we're still working through kind of what that funding is going to look like on the Minnesota side. However, on the North Dakota side, we're projecting with inflationary dollars about $361 million over the life of this plan, which we think is enough to complete our priorities and maintain the system in a state of good repair. There's one caveat to that, and that's the interstate. We know in talking with North Dakota DOT and Minnesota DOT that within the life of this plan, the interstate on both sides of the river is going to need to be reconstructed. The funds that are usually used for that are controlled by DOT, and they're spent throughout the state. We did a historic analysis of 10 years in the past, and we just could not come up with enough of those funds that have been spent in this area because they spend them on other portions of the interstate that need to be reconstructed throughout the state. So we know that the states have control of those funds. They do their projections, whether that's enough money or not. And so we kind of took that out of the plan and just said, these project costs for reconstructing the interstate in our area are higher than what we could do an historical analysis for. And so we're kind of kicking the can to the DOT to make sure that they are aware that the interstate is going to need work, and they are in control of those funds, and they need to obligate those funds to those local projects within the life of the plan. And they know this information, but the MTP has to be fiscally constrained, and we just could not show the historic amount of spending in our area with the NHPP and IM funds. So getting into some of our broad-based goals of the plan, and the goals are mentioned throughout the plan in multiple areas, but these are just some of the ones that we use to prioritize projects, especially. And this is the page directly out of our plan. We'll go through them kind of one by one. We had 6 or 8 different categories: system safety and security, which is a federal directive, travel efficiency and reliability, walking and biking. I suppose I can slow down so you can read what's at the bottom there. Walking and biking, transit access, maintain transportation infrastructure. These are state of good repair projects. Environmental sustainability. And economic development and transportation decisions. And then emerging transportation trends. So the roadway section, these are some of the policies that we kind of incorporated into the plan that we wanted to act as a guide when we're both choosing projects and doing planning and programming in our area. So some congestion policies, again, you can see up there, balancing livability with mobility. We know that with the main avenue discussions, a lot of citizens are becoming more attuned to how roadways impact their individual neighborhoods. And we want to make sure that we are keying in on what corridors should be mobility corridors and what corridors could be mobility or livability corridors, and maybe which corridors have a mixture of both. We do need to make sure that people are able to get around this region, but we don't want that negatively impacting the quality of life in our area. And so we don't want certain scenarios where a roadway creates a barrier for people to get across, and so there's no connection between two sides of the street. But we also know that we have to make sure, for the economic health of the region, that people are able to to get to work, or goods are able to move freely throughout the region. So one thing that we've really been looking at over the past couple of years is how connective our system is. And because of the interstate system, because of the drain network, because of the river, we know that a lot of our roadway network has kind of been cut off from one another. Good examples of this would be there in the southern area, there's only mile crossings and maybe only 2-mile crossings in some area of the interstate, whereas historically there have been some projects that have done mid-mile crossings. There have been a lot of discussions of where and when and how many drain crossings should be within a section. Metro COG has worked with local jurisdictions in order to do some future planning so that when developers are laying out developments in those areas that they can plan on for those crossings across the drains. This is important because if you don't have a connected interior network within a section, the arterials tend to grow and grow and grow. And so there are obvious cost implications to that philosophy, but also livability implications as well. And then one big one that I've mentioned a couple of times now is the preservation and maintenance of our system. And I would call out the excessive burden to taxpayer line in there. So we use those former goals in order to prioritize our projects. We came up with a matrix that had some decision-making guide and some point values in there, and we walk through that. I won't read them all because it's fairly extensive. This is just the straight out of the plan, that table that we utilized in order to score projects. And I can provide that to anyone who's more interested. There's another table that is listed in the appendices that is actually each project as it's scored and how it's prioritized. So now we get really to the kind of the number one thing that this plan does is set forth future roadway projects. This is the short term within the next 3 years of what projects that we think are moving forward. We work very collaboratively with all of the engineers within each of our districts, and we've come up with this list. And it's broken down by Minnesota and North Dakota because of the difference in funding there. And so on the Minnesota side, we have 30th Avenue, which is a preservation project. And then on the North Dakota side, a couple of projects rose to the top. Cheyenne Street, which is a continuation of that project from 40th to 52nd, which addresses that LOS concern from that map before. And then a future interchange at 64th Avenue and I-29. There are a number of preservation projects in there as well, 19th Avenue North and 32nd Avenue South. 19th Avenue North, that's a continuation of the work that has been going on in that corridor in the last 5 and 10 years. So as we get into the midterm, I won't list all these projects, I'll just kind of let you quickly read through them if you can see. I also provided a packet of the project, all of the projects that are listed in our plan, both the fiscally constrained and non-fiscally constrained for roadway and bicycle and pedestrian. Feel free to take one with you. Just go through. Here's the big map of everything. I'll call out that we did include some quote-unquote bypass scenarios within this plan, more to forward that discussion. In the last couple of long-range transportation plans, a bypass velocity has been mentioned, but not fiscally constrained. Most of that bypass scenario would occur outside of our urbanized area and therefore not eligible for urban funds. However, there would be possibly some segments that could occur within the urban area that may be eligible for funding. And so we just wanted to include that discussion within this plan. You can see from the vision plan that I'll get into that we really forward some of those far-reaching elements of that bypass. But I'll key in on that. The blue ring there on a lot of our arterials are actually signal coordination projects, and maybe some access removal or other techniques that could gain a little bit more efficiency in some of those corridors. You could, from the LOS maps and the intersection safety maps, we wanted to address some of those issues by having better signal timing, signal coordination, and maybe some other techniques that could reduce some of those crashes and maybe get us a little bit more efficiency rather than just adding lanes in a lot of those areas. Most of those roadways are already 6-laned anyways, and so just adding capacity to the roadway network is not going to get us out of some of the problems that pop up. For instance, this Veterans project is tentatively in there, which is a widening of that corridor, but we think that maybe adding some more efficiency could get us out of actually adding lanes. So there's a lot of those discussions that occurred within the planning process for this plan. We get into the vision plan, which is the non-fiscally constrained projects. So all of those, they're a lot larger projects, interchanges and grade separations, bypasses, things of that nature. Go through that. Here's a plan. As you can see, the interstate in green there is in that vision plan, knowing that we are not fiscally constraining those projects. The state will be fiscally constraining those projects. But you can see elements of bypass routes here and in the north. And then there's Moorhead and Dilworth. We're looking at possibly extending roadways into their growth areas and possibly have interchanges with either 336 or I-94, some of those larger projects. So moving into some of the other modes in our plan, bicycle and pedestrian, we really, again, wanted to promote the ability for people to get around this region without having to get in a car. And these are just some of the goals that we have. I will say that we want to ensure that the urban form is laid out in such a manner to facilitate those multimodal transportation options. And we've been looking at that as an agency within the last couple of years. For instance, we conducted a study in 2017 called the West Fargo Parking and Access Requirement Study, and it has a really long, weird name, but really what it got into is how do we lay out developments in order for there to be kind of more livable aspects. How do we have traffic move efficiently whilst also implementing some of the livability characteristics to some of the urban form. It's a very interesting plan. I would direct you to our website if you'd like to read a little bit more on that one. We also did a walking accessibility study, and this looks at how close jobs and services and goods are to where you live. As you can see in the downtown areas, very high degree of walking accessibilities, and in some of the outlying, more suburban type areas, there's not a lot of walking accessibility. We would really, and I apologize, Horace and a lot of West Fargo are covered by the legend there, but most of it's the same color as over here. We would really like to put forward the idea of having multiple walking accessibility centers throughout the region, so people don't necessarily have to get in a car, don't have to drive across town to get some of the goods and the services that they desire. These are a lot of the projects that are included there. I won't go into it in depth. And we also had a vision plan for the bike and ped. I'll call out a couple of projects here. In the West Fargo Comprehensive Plan, they included 2 new structures over I-94 for pedestrian and bicyclists. One would connect to the hospital, and the other would connect to neighborhoods. And so we just really wanted, we thought that that was a really good idea, and we wanted to put that forward in our plan, but couldn't fiscally constrain it. So I mentioned transit a little bit earlier. We want to ensure that the density of land uses and affordable housing options are developed in such a manner that they are supportive of transit. One idea that we've been talking a lot with transit, and we've incorporated into their plans, is this idea of transit supportive corridors. Instead of having pockets of density where transit has to serve, that we wanted to have corridors where that could be highly accessed by transit options. We also want to make sure that we're talking to different providers on our area, especially dealing with low income and minority populations, that they really key in on where transit service is currently when they're choosing a location, rather than kind of hopping throughout the area and transit having to adjust dramatically in order to service them. This is just a page directly out of the plan. So now we get into this catch-all category, which is very interesting. One of the requirements when we become a TMA is that we have a congestion management plan and that we institute a congestion management process. And that congestion management process looks at how we're spending money in order to alleviate congestion in our area, and how we could maybe do things a little differently and institute different things in order to alleviate that congestion. It's really designed at large urban areas. However, there are a lot of philosophies in there that we've kind of grabbed and taken hold of. And we'll get into some of these discussions here in future slides, but our goals in this section are really to have a mix of land uses, integrating new technology. There's that livability and mobility statement again, and then efficiency rather than capacity, and then just develop some new analysis tools and do some more data gathering as an organization so we can better provide information to our local jurisdictions. So some of those strategies are listed here in the plan. Innovative roadway designs, innovative use of technology. One thing that's very interesting that's being instituted in the Main Avenue project are these dynamic messaging signs that tell you when trains are approaching. And so you can make routing decisions based upon that information. And we thought that's interesting, and Moorhead's looking at instituting that as well. And that's just an example of both a congestion management practice as well as an intelligent transportation solution. So just call that out. We had to call out a transportation management network. We really have a kind of a, I think I have a larger map here, a three-tiered network, starting with the interstate as our primary. We know that we can't necessarily have complete control over the interstate. However, a lot of people do use it to move throughout the region, much to the chagrin of the North Dakota DOT. But since it is kind of the main center piece of our transportation system in the area, as the two major interstates are meeting, we want to make sure that we're best managing traffic on the interstate, especially for freight movements. And then the secondary would be the NHS system, National Highway System, which is in the deeper blue as well. And then the third would be our other arterials system. We don't get into a discussion of congestion on our collectors or local system, because we know we don't want those to be mobility corridors. We want those to be the livability areas. So this mainly focuses on those areas that are going to serve a higher purpose. We integrated some emerging technology discussions in our plan. We did not, though, expound upon how that might affect the transportation network or certain projects that we may have to do or technologies to integrate. That discussion is very new. The technologies have not been developed. There are multiple competing technologies out there, and so we just wanted to say that this is something that may be coming in the future. We don't know how it's going to affect us. There's wild variance on the discussions that are happening, especially at the collegiate level, where they're doing a lot of scenario planning around the connected and automated vehicle discussion, kind of picking and choosing what their assumptions are and then running a travel demand model and seeing what the outcomes are. But there's such a wide array that we didn't want to kind of have that in the plan. We just want to make sure that we're tracking those discussions. But another thing that is here now are these micromobility devices, like these electric scooters, which, depending upon what city you talk to, are either the greatest thing in the world or the bane of their existence. I was in San Francisco this summer, or this last spring, for the National Planning Conference, and they have allowed the electric scooters in their downtown for micromobility options. They see a definite positive, but they see also a negative. People really are not sure whether they are a vehicle or whether they are like a pedestrian. So people ride on sidewalks, and they'll also ride in fast-moving traffic. And the scooters go about 20 miles an hour, and so they're really this missing, or there's really this weird median between like a bicycle and a walker and an automobile. So a lot of communities don't know what to do with them right now. We are looking at how those could benefit transportation in our region. So final slide here. I know it's been a long presentation, but these are just some of the recommendations that we have kind of looked at in our plan, and things that will be moved forward into implementation in the next 5 years. I'll call out that we will likely need a broad-based study of the interstate network in our area, especially with reconstruction and how it operates, and the possibility of new interchanges and how those will function with the entire system, as well as some of those connectivity discussions. The Veterans Boulevard Corridor Study would look at how that could be a possible missing connection from 40th to 100th. So with that, I think I'll just open it up to any questions that anybody may have.
If you do have questions, I'll pass around the mic just so we can all hear. And for those online viewing this.
I will say this is a very annotated discussion, a presentation. There's a lot more information in our plan. I could, read it to you, but that would probably take all day. So I would encourage you to look at the draft plan on our website, and we will be accepting comments for about a month. So
I have a question, Michael.
Sure.
So will the membership, once it reaches this 2020 threshold, will the membership stay the same, or will there be an opportunity for other cities to join, or could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That's interesting. There are requirements for a TMA that are, especially for the membership that sits on your policy committee, different from what it is now. For instance, they mandate that there's a transit representative on our policy board. And airport authority. So bringing in other modes as decision makers that kind of run the agency. We will likely stick with the same membership, as in the full membership and associate membership that we do now, because we have instituted certain population thresholds as a region. And we don't see that changing. It'll be interesting though, we've instituted Horace as a full member of the organization, but a lot of the other organizations like Barnesville's an associate member, I believe, currently, are not directly attached to our urban area, and therefore they kind of have a little bit less of a buy-in because they just can't receive the urban funding for transportation projects.
I can comment on that too. I think that a couple of the jurisdictions that we would like to visit with in the near future about possible full membership would be Mapleton and Harwood. They're the cities that have the closest proximity to the Fargo-Moorhead, West Fargo, Dilworth urbanized area, and probably have the most to gain from being connected to some of our studies, and some of our studies get very, very close to them already. So that's something we'll be visiting with them, you know, within the next couple of years about that.
Say, Michael and Cindy, I was just wondering, when you were in Cindy's presentation there, you were talking about all the people who come into our metro area. Do you have any idea what that distribution is? I mean, are most of them coming from western Minnesota where they live at the lake, or are they coming from all four directions? Or do you have any concept of how that breaks down?
We do. I don't have the specific numbers off the top of my head, but most people do come from the Minnesota side, all through Trunk Highway 10. Smaller that come from the south. People from I think it's the north. I can't remember the order, but I think that come from the east is the highest. Of course, the lakes region out there, a lot of people, I know many people who live out there and commute into work every day, so.
I know a lot of work goes into the modeling on the computer side and also the data collection, but curious in terms of emerging technologies or things you'd like to see, not necessarily on the transit, but on the data collection. So thinking about, you know, the 2050 plan, what are you anticipating in terms of higher fidelity and opportunities to have greater plans?
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't mention, and I kind of just glossed over, is a lot of our data collection. We want to move to more automated data collection. There was a study that was done with ATAC and through Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute. I think I got that right. Where they implemented these autoscope devices that do the signal timing or that do detection at signals, but they're also able to count traffic. And so one of the things that we could utilize that for is do a dynamic traffic assignment model. If we're always collecting information and we know that certain construction projects move things in certain ways, that we can anticipate the flow difference from doing certain things to the transportation system. And that would give us a lot better idea of what the impact of a lot of the projects are, especially like routing decisions for Main Avenue. You know, it's kind of been theorized where they're going to go, but we'll see in the upcoming years where traffic is actually going to move to. And maybe with some of those different modeling tools that we could actually predict with a higher degree of certainty.
We should also mention the better origin destination data that we can get from big data, whether that's Google or purchasing it from Streetlight. We're going to be purchasing the Streetlight platform from MnDOT this next year, and their data goes 50 miles past the state border. So fortunately for us, we can take advantage of it for our whole area, and that has a lot of origin destination data through cell phone use and through location services that will allow us, I think, to do a better job on that origin destination, because to do a traditional origin destination study is extremely costly and time consuming. And I don't know that you get any better data than what you get from the technical services that are out there now. And so that's one of the things we're looking to improve on and you know, hopefully get better travel demand modeling results from that.
Another question regarding sort of what you learned from public outreach and this comment about livability and auto mobility. You know, obviously the Main Avenue conversation evolved a lot from what the initial public conversation was to sort of what a re-emergent conversation was. I think about the 11th Street underpass in Moorhead and sort of the train congestion and the 2021 underpass there, but what is the engagement you're seeing in terms of something like that, where the option is, do you want to avoid the train versus the reality and implications of multi-lane underpass in a scenario like that?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, we received a lot of comments in our planning effort from the bicycle and pedestrian community. One, area that we tried to reach out to and weren't very successful is the commuting public, people who travel, longer distances, and I think it's probably a function of time and availability. We tried to go to maybe more of that suburban atmosphere to get those, but we know most of those people have families and that are maybe not necessarily available. But as far as the discussion, on other modes of transportation and what feels good to people, one of the discussions that we are starting to have internally is how we're orienting our bicycle and pedestrian network in this region. And you saw for that accessibility exercise, we want to make sure that the areas that have goods and services have direct connection to neighborhoods. For instance, when Osgood was developed, it's a good example of putting in kind of neighborhood level commercial, but it's cut off from the residents. It's facing the wrong direction. It should be facing towards the neighborhood rather towards the street. And that's a function of regional economy that, this nation has been moving towards for 50 years. So it's not necessarily the fault of any, it's just a economic reality that we're living with, but how do we return things to more of a person level rather than an automobile level? And we've heard that discussion with a lot of we call them side paths that are located along our arterials. We understand that those are not, we've heard from the people through this planning process, that those are not the most attractive things, and they don't actually allow you to compete with the automobile because you're using the same basically system. You're going the same distance and you have to go slower and they can go faster, so it just doesn't compete. So we're looking at how maybe we can integrate more of a trail approach to our bicycle and pedestrian network, so that transportation from the bicycle and pedestrian standpoint can be more competitive with the automobile and provide an environment where it's more comfortable to begin from that standpoint. Did that answer your question?
I would add this in general, when we ask people for comments, bicycle and pedestrian facilities is one of the things we get the most comments on. And people say, well, I really like what was done on 4th Avenue, but I wish it went farther. Or things like that, where they ask us for higher levels or they're asking us to try to achieve higher levels of connectivity in both the pedestrian and the bicycle network. And we know that's, challenging for the leaders in the metropolitan area, because they want to make sure that when they decide to fund projects and go ahead with projects, that they're doing that in a way that is safe for the public and that is, bringing value to everyone. And so, but like Michael said, for whatever reason, that seems to be what a lot of people key in on when they're giving us comments at the public events that we've had. So.
Yeah, and that directly led in the plan to the funding decisions, the financial side of the plan, where we're wanting to fund those projects, because we've heard throughout the process that those projects are kind of the most important things that people key in on. Ten more minutes, no. Well, if nobody has any questions, I did not put our contact information, but if you go to our website, www.fmmetrocog.org, you can find my contact information. Again, I'm Michael Maddox, Senior Transportation Planner. You can send me an email or give me a call, and I can respond to your question or comment. Thank you very much.